Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the Demco Air Force One braking system for towed vehicles on a 2020 Chevy Silverado 1500. There's 5 required components when flat towing any vehicle, and on our Chevy 1500 today, we'll start by taking a look at the base plate. And the base plate is going to mount to where the factory tow hooks were, or structurally to the frame of the vehicle, creating a mounting point for the rest of your components and also your tow bar. Tow bar is your second component, and that is connecting point between the base plate and the hitch on the RV. Now, just like a trailer, we have our safety cables here that'll attach to the tabs on the base plate that are going to be your safety chain loops, and then you'll just attach those to the safety chain loops on your RV. We also have our diode wiring, which is going to transmit the light signals from the RV to the taillights on the towed vehicle, keeping you safe and legal. You'll get your running lights, your turn signals, as well as your brake lights on the taillights of your towed truck. Now, also we have a braking system, which is going to slow and stop the vehicle as you apply the brakes. Today we have an Air Force One, so that's what this cable is, because we have air brakes on our coach. But this is our breakaway switch, which is part of a braking system, any of them. And that way, in case of a catastrophic disconnect where everything was to fail, it'll pull this cable, bringing the vehicle to a slow or stop. Now, something that's specific to the 1500 and a few other newer vehicles is the fact that it has electric assist brakes. And what you're going to want to do with that is add a battery disconnect. That way you can disconnect the battery and it's going to keep the braking system working fine as you're flat towing the vehicle. Now, you can unhook the battery from the positive terminal, but it's kind of a little bit cumbersome to do each time. So adding a breakaway switch is going to be ideal. And keep in mind, this is a Duramax. There is a diesel specific battery disconnect as well as a gas one. So make sure you're picking up the proper battery disconnect. Having a braking system on a flat towed vehicle is a legal requirement, and depending on the coach you have, you're going to have a few different options of braking systems. And personally, if you're going to have a vehicle that you're going to keep for a while and flat tow for a while, you want to pick up probably a fixed system. You also have portable systems, but that's one more thing to set up and store, whereas your fixed system, once it's installed, you really just kind of hook it up and you're ready to go. And the Air Force One is one of those systems, and this one is specifically for coaches that have air brakes, and this is my personal favorite. So if you have a coach with air brakes and you want to flat tow your vehicle, highly recommend looking at the Air Force One. It's pretty straightforward as far as installation goes, and it seems to be extremely reliable. Now, the way that this system works, there is going to be a tank that you install on your RV, and that's going to be just a supplemental air system that's going to tap into your supplied and metered air. So as you apply those brakes and the pressure goes through, it goes through a regulator and then through our air coil into the towed vehicle to the main unit, and that's going to send that pressure to the cylinder mounted up on your brake pedal. So as you apply the brakes on the RV, whether it be a slow or hard stop, it's going to apply it exactly the same on the towed vehicle. So if you're just lightly braking, it'll lightly brake on your vehicle, but a hard panic stop is going to do the same for your towed vehicle. Also included in the kit is going to be a breakaway switch, and all braking systems are going to have this. This goes on the front of the vehicle, and that way, in case your safety cables, your tow bar, your base plate, everything fails, this is the last line of defense, because if this was to pull, that's going to apply the brakes on the towed vehicle, bringing it to a stop. That way it's not rolling down the highway. Now, this kit is going to be available in a few different configurations, and it really comes down to what you may already have on your coach. Sometimes your newer coaches are already prepped with that tank already installed. It makes it a lot easier, and that way you should have a push connect or a quick connect fitting on the back, and if you see that, that's a great way to save some money, because you can use a second vehicle kit, which is just the vehicle side. You don't have to worry about doing the RV side. Makes it a little bit easier. Now, we didn't have that today, so we did the full install, but you can get it also with a LED indicator to let you know that your brakes are being applied, or a wireless coach link, which is really nice for those of you that want to make sure that your brakes are actually applying on the towed vehicle without having to look in your rear view camera. You can simply see the monitor mounted up on the dash. That'll light up as you apply the brakes. Now, as far as the installation goes, on the vehicle side, it's really not too bad. As when it comes to the electrical portion, it's actually quite a bit less than some of the other braking systems out there, because it's utilizing the air. So really, you got to run a few things. You got to mount up some components, but overall, none of it's terribly hard. Getting the tank on your RV is a little bit cumbersome because you're under your RV cutting airlines. But other than that, it's really not too bad. You can definitely do this yourself if you're somewhat handy. I'll walk you through all the steps. You can use our video as well as the instruction manual to make sure you get your braking system installed. So let's take a look. Before we begin our installation, when it comes down to any braking system for a flat-toed vehicle, it can get overwhelming. There's a lot of connections being made, but the main thing is setting everything up exactly where it needs to go ahead of time. So there's a few of those main components that I'll kind of break down and lay out roughly where they're going to go. And for now, we're just going to be focusing on the vehicle side. There is a portion that will tie into the RV, but we'll tackle that a little bit later. So on the front of the vehicle, there's going to be two things that we're going to be mounting up. Now, we already have our diode wiring installed. This is something that you're going to want to consider putting in as well. That'll transmit the light signals from the RV to the taillights on the towed vehicle. But also being mounted up on the front is going to be our breakaway switch and then also our quick connect fitting. And the way that this works with our Air Force One is it's going to take the air pressure from the brakes on your coach and send it via an umbilical to this connector here that will run to our main unit and eventually disperse the air pressure to the cylinder mounted on the pedal. So this needs to be in a spot up front somewhere that's easily accessible to be able to hook this up. Same goes for our breakaway switch. This is going to be mounted up, and that way we'll have this cable. We'll just attach this to the hitch on the RV, and in case of a catastrophic disconnect where everything was to fail, it'll pull this, and that's going to apply the brakes on the towed vehicle, bringing it to a slower stop. Now, sometimes on trucks like this, it's not exactly easy to find something, so I might be fabricating a little bracket or something to mount these up, because you're going to want them nice and solid. You don't want to just mount it into plastic because you want a nice secure mount. So I may have to get a little bit crafty with that, but either way, these will need to live on the front of the vehicle. Now, I mentioned the RV side, so we have our reservoir tank, which will later tie into the air system on the RV, and this is that quick connect umbilical that will go from that push connect fitting on the front to the push connect fitting that's going to be on the back of the RV. So since we're just focusing on the vehicle side, we'll set these aside for now. Now, that push connect fitting is going to have 1/4-inch airline tube that will eventually go to our main unit. And this is going to be mounted somewhere in the engine bay. You can mount it underneath, but really anywhere in the engine bay is going to be safe. It's designed to do that. But we'll be running that 1/4-inch airline into the air in. We also have air out, which will get 1/4-inch airline tube and run into the inside of the vehicle through the firewall. And this will eventually go to our cylinder. Now we have this barb fitting for vacuum, and this is to tie into the brake booster line. That way it can relieve that pressure as it uses the air to actuate the cylinder. So I mentioned that air going out through the firewall to the cylinder. This is what our cylinder looks like. So let's hop inside and I'll show you where this goes. Now, something that's specific to the Air Force One cylinder, which is really nice, is this reed switch. And essentially this picks up when there's a magnet, and when this is applied, it no longer has that. It then sends a signal to say, hey, the brakes are being applied, which will then eventually make its way to our indicator light. Now, you can get this with the wireless coach link, which is really cool. It sends a wireless transmitted signal to the dash on the RV to a monitor. This is the alternative. This is the diode illumination, and this will just go on our rear view mirror of the vehicle. I'll route the wires kind of up in the headliner, down the A-pillar, and eventually tie in electrical to this. This will also run to 12-volt power to get that signal. So as we run things through the firewall, like our airline, we do want to make sure that we have all of our connections at least pass through the firewall. It makes it easier to do it one time. But this is going to illuminate when those brakes are applied. That way, when you look in your rear view camera, it's a great physical way to let you know that the brakes are being applied, and that way you know that it's working as you hit the brakes on your RV. Now, because much of the heavy lifting or stopping is done by air pressure, this is actually a pretty easy system to do from an electronic standpoint or wiring standpoint. So if you're not an electrical expert, not a problem. This is actually a pretty easy system to do. Now, on the RV side, it does get a little bit more than other vehicles because you have to tie into those airlines. So something you're going to want to check is on your coach. Some of the newer ones are already prepped, ready to go. So if you have a push connect fitting on the rear of your RV, chances are you can get away getting a second vehicle kit for the Air Force One, which simply is just what I went through here. And that way you don't have to worry about the RV side. And if that's the case, you're in luck. If not, not to worry. We're also going to take a look at the RV side to get that installed. So now that we kind of laid everything out and kind of what it does, I'll go ahead and get mine mounted up. You can see exactly where I got it mounted, and I'll show you how to make some connections as well. Now I've gone ahead, I got everything installed for at least the vehicle side on our braking system, and something that I ran into is finding a nice solid mounting point for my breakaway switch as well as our air fitting. A lot of times I try to find a nice piece of metal to create a bracket to mount up to. There's a lot of plastic on this bumper and nothing really worked out too well. So I ended up using the bracket that comes with the air fitting. I just separated that and mounted my own custom bracket to get this breakaway switch kind of mounted. It's going to come down to your own fabrication skills. You can mount it up to, you know, something under here. Just know that that's plastic. You want to make sure that long term it's going to hold up. So if you want to put a backing plate or something along those lines, that's a great option. Either way, from our breakaway switch, we have two wires. There's going to be an orange wire and a black wire. And we also have our 1/4-inch airline tube, and these both follow the same path up. So from this connection point on here, we'll just track it up here. And I have my wires kind of tucked down. You'll see that that orange wire from the breakaway switch is actually tied into the brown wire. We'll come back to that, and that makes its way eventually to 12-volt power. But we have two wires off of our main unit, and that's pretty easy because it's just the black wire, which is down here, attaches to the black wire from our breakaway switch. Now you may notice the heat shrink butt connectors that I use. I highly recommend using these in the engine bay. These create a nice watertight seal. Once you cinch those down, you're just simply going to strip back the wire, crimp them down, take the heat gun to them, and that'll seal these up. So off the main unit, the two wires that you have, black to black. The other black wire, I just ran to this factory ground that we have right here, just put a ring terminal on it and tighten that down. So pretty easy there. That 1/4-inch airline tube from our fitting will also just plug into our main unit, and that's going to go in the air in port. So that's the middle one. Now, something I'll point out when cutting airline tube, it is very important to make sure that you have nice clean cuts. You may be tempted to use just a pair of snips, and unfortunately that makes an oval or an almond shape, and sometimes that makes it to where it's not so easy to get in that push connect fitting, and it's not going to seat as well. So if you have a tubing cutter, that works really well. The alternative is if you have a very sharp utility knife and put it on a flat surface, just press down straight and you should get a nice clean square cut that maintains that circular shape. So make sure you're doing that for all of your 1/4-inch airline tubes here. That's going to be just for the basic not having airlines leak. It's going to be worth doing, just cutting it right the first time. Now we'll head back to that orange wire from the breakaway switch. That ties in with the brown wire that will eventually run its way into the firewall of the vehicle and into the inside to get the 12-volt signal for our indicator light, or if you have the wireless coach link, power that. And that ties into the same wire and eventually a fuse holder. So I just grabbed a little bit of extra red wire here, ran this through. I created my own little grommet just to get a nice clean path. And then eventually that just attaches to our fuse holder. And that will run to our 12-volt source, which is going to be our battery. So there's a nice little open spot here. You can route that in. Now, something I'll point out while we're here is this vehicle, since it has electric assist brakes, you are going to want to grab a battery disconnect. And this is the Duramax version, so the diesel disconnect is different from the gas. So just make sure that you're taking a look at obviously what vehicle you have, but which disconnect you may have. I use the Roadmaster gas or diesel. This one's the diesel version. It's really nice. I was able to mount this up, just kind of tucked it here, and this allows us to power on and off just at the flip of a switch. But if yours doesn't look like this, that's because you don't have your battery disconnect in, but I would recommend picking this up. Back to that brown wire. We're going to follow that into the firewall, but we're also going to be tracking that along with the air out, which will go to our cylinder. So those both just run up. And then I made my way here where I have some wire loom. This is just, as you can see, I'll peel this back. It's just the brown wire and the airline tube in there. And I use some loom clamp and attach it to the inside portion of this support. So it runs all the way in here. And then it just makes its way over where I fish wired through our hood latch release. Now the hood latch release, you'll just track that underneath the dash, and you're going to find it has a rubber grommet. If you pull that out with a set of needle nose pliers, you can make a little bit of a snip to get your airline tube as well as that brown wire passed in. I recommend doing that at the same time, but cut out just enough to get clearance for those to pass through, and then when you're done, you can always put a little bit of RTV silicone to seal that back up. So as these route in, let's head inside and I'll show you the rest of the connections. We'll go to our indicator light because this is going to tie into that brown wire and also the reed switch from our cylinder. So this just with double-sided tape gets stuck to the rear view mirror. I then popped off this cap and just routed it up into this your roof panel here, your ceiling, and then just routed it on the A-pillar down through our weather stripping. This panel I popped off and then ran that underneath the dash. So you'll see the brown wire, I passed that through that small grommet, and then I made the connection to our reed switch bullet connector, and that pin is going to be they call it violet. It's more of a brown color, but you can see that attaches to it. So the violet wire goes to the brown. Now off the reed switch, there's also the blue wire, and it's going to be hard to see here. Sorry, it's kind of tucked up in there, but that is just going to get connected to the red wire off of our indicator light. And that way when it's pressed or our reed switch is activated by the cylinder going off of that magnet, it'll send the 12-volt power through it. Now, so pretty easy, red to blue, violet to violet, or brown to brown, whatever you want to call it. And then we have our black wire here. This is just a ground, so I just extended a white wire and then just self-tapped it into the metal somewhere on the chassis. If you can find a factory ground, you can also utilize that. So pretty easy here. Same thing, our airline, I just pushed this in our push connect fitting. Now with the push connect fittings, it's important that it's seated properly. So when you push down, you should kind of feel it set, but push it a little bit more and you'll get it to kind of pop in. Now you should be able to pull this and it'll be locked in place, and if you ever need to loosen this, you can just pull back on the collar and then pull that airline tube out. But we'll get this plugged in. Now this will all get zip tied up. But while we're here, the way we mounted up our cylinder, there's actually a factory stud to kind of keep the carpet in place. And so what I did is I just mounted up the bracket with the self-tappers to give it a little bit of, added protection of just putting too much stress on that. And then I just grabbed a nut. I believe this was a 1/4-20, and we just tightened that down on with the bracket. And we have our cylinder mounted right about here. So that way, when you apply the brakes, you should be able to pull this cylinder back, and it should be a pretty straight shot to that firewall. Once all your connections are made, you may need to adjust the reed switch. There's just a little Phillips screw that you'll move that. And what you're looking for is at rest, the pedal should not be illuminating that. So make sure you put your fuse in the fuse holder. And to check it, you're just going to want to push on the brake pedal and pull the cylinder back. And it should light up when you pull that cylinder back. And when you release everything, that light should go off. So with everything hooked up, we know that our indicator light's working, all of the electrical connections are made. So I'm going to zip tie up everything, get some wire loom on our wires, just kind of give it a little cleaner look. And in order to test our braking system, we're going to need to get that RV side done. So I'll get this buttoned up, we'll head over to the RV and I'll show you how to get that installed. We're underneath our RV, we're using a lift. You obviously probably don't have these at home, which is totally fine. You can do this on the ground. It's going to get a little bit tight and you're going to be reaching up there. But basically we need to cut into our supplied air as well as our metered air and create a T and mount that up. Those lines will go to our reservoir tank, which eventually will go to the back of the vehicle. So the first thing I recommend doing is figuring out exactly where those lines are, and it really is dependent on your chassis. So we have a Freightliner today. If you have a Freightliner, you can follow along with this. But they have them broken down in the instruction manual pretty well with pictures. That way you can get an idea of exactly where yours is at, and I'll give you some tips to make sure that you're doing it correctly. So first thing, find your supplied and metered air. Ours is right in front of our rear axle, so let's take a look. So underneath our Freightliner, I'm going to reach up here and we have a large diameter green hose, and this is the one that kind of goes into the slightly angled push connect fitting. This is going to be our supplied air. Now I'm not going to cut into this quite yet. I wanted to determine that we have the for sure metered air, and the metered air on this one is this loop that comes from our top portion to our brake relay. So it should be this airline here. So what I'm going to do is take the push connect fitting and release the metered air. Now there shouldn't be any air pressure in it, but what we'll do is we'll hop in the coach, hit the brakes, and if air is going through that line, we know that we have that metered air proper. Your push connect fittings are just like the ones on the car side of the Air Force One, so just push that in. Now if it's built up with grime and kind of debris, you might want to use some brake cleaner and just kind of clean that up. So I had this unhooked from the brake relay meter, so what we'll do, I'll hop in the RV, hit the brakes, look for air pressure coming through, and if it does, we know we have the proper metered air. Now if you're doing this by yourself, you could probably just put a piece of tape over this, and if that tape shoots off, you know you have the right line. So I pressed the brakes, found that the air was coming through this, so we are good. And I'm using tubing cutters here, so just like the Air Force One, make sure it's a nice clean cut, and just kind of go in the middle of it. We're gonna just cut right here. And it's pretty natural that these get just built up with road grime. And you want to make sure that it's going to have a nice seal on your push connect fitting, because really all we're doing is creating a T to get the airline in there. So both of your sides, what I recommend doing, take that brake cleaner and then just wipe this edge, and that's going to clean that up and make sure that it seals up well. So I'll get this end clean. I'll do the same on the other end. Now with both ends clean, I'll just press this on, make sure that it's seated properly, give it a tug to make sure that it's not going to fall off. I'll connect this end to the other end, and then we'll just reattach it to the original fitting. So we have our fitting in place. Now we're going to tackle our supplied air, and you're going to want to find a nice, clean, straight run. This can get a little bit tricky. This line is not very flexible, and a lot of times there's not a whole lot of excess. Now we're going to be obviously adding length with our fitting in there, so you can always trim off a little bit more. Just take your time here. And I will warn you, as you cut this line, this is where tubing cutters come in hand. It is going to have some supplied air in it, so don't be surprised when that air rushes out. That cut, I'm going to clean this end and I'm going to attach it here, and then I'll trim back this green line as far back as I need to get this in place. And you'll see our 1/4 inch is here. So once we get this attached, we're just going to attach our 1/4 inch airline tubes to the 2 T's that we just put in, and we're going to start routing those to our tank. Getting your tank mounted up, there's a bunch of different spots on the frame that you can drill into. Really, whatever just kind of stays out of the way that you can run your airlines nice and clean is going to work. We have put ours here in this storage compartment, made it nice and easy for the installation. Now on this side, we have 1 push connect fitting. On the other side, there's actually 2 of them. In this far 90-degree corner, that's going to run all the way back to our fitting that we mounted up, and that's just going to get the 1/4 inch airline tube plugged in there and ran back. Drilled this in, mounted up our bracket, and now we have this portion done. So all that's left to do is tie from our T-fittings that we put on the supplied and metered air into the tank. Now pretty easy. The supplied air again goes to that 1 quick connect fitting side, whereas the metered air is going to go on the one that has the 2. So I'll run my airlines back, make those connections, zip tie everything up, and we'll be good to go. Now once you have everything connected, you're going to want to start your RV, let it get up to the operating air pressure for the system, and listen for audible leaks, A. B, you're going to want to take soapy water, spray all of your connections, and look for large air bubbles forming. That's generally a pretty good sign that you have an air leak. Now if you are finding those, you're going to want to get that air dispersed, and then make sure that you're reseating all of your connections or where it's leaking, and that's a great way to at least try to get it fixed. And if not, you may end up needing to cut just a little bit more off and then reseat it. Once we have the RV side done, all that's left to do is get our air cable attached to the RV and our towed vehicle. I'm going to shut the battery off on this vehicle, and then we'll hit the brakes on the RV. Make sure that it's transmitting that brake not only to your indicator light, but also that the pedal is actuating. Once you see that the brakes are working properly, you've officially installed your Air Force One braking system. All that's left to do is get the rest of your flat tow components set up, get your vehicle in tow mode, and you're ready to hit the road. And that was a look at installation of the Air Force One braking system on a 2020 Chevy Silverado 1500.